Well, greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome to the best day of the week at Star Wars Talk Tuesdays, where all we do is just talk about our favorite thing in the world, which is, of course, Star Wars, this, Star Wars, that, everything and nothing but Star Wars. I'm, of course, your host, John Campea. It's an honor and a privilege to have you guys joining me here this week as we're talking about some Star Wars. We got a couple things lined up here that we're going to talk about. Here's how today's show is going to go. I have picked out 4 topics that you guys have emailed into me that you want us to talk about on Star Wars Talk Tuesdays. How do you get a topic or question on Star Wars Talk Tuesdays? It's really rather simple. You just email me anytime at john@thejohncampeashow.com. This is important, guys. Put SWTT, that stands for Star Wars Talk Tuesdays, but put SWTT in the subject line, and as always, keep your emails as short as possible, absolutely 90 words or less. Then after that, we're going to be going to the live chat. You can send in a live chat via Super Chat. That guarantees your question will get on the show. And if there's still time, I'm going to go over to Twitter as well and take some questions for Twitter's time permitting. There hasn't been time lately, but if there is, I will go over there. All right, with that out of the way, let's jump into it and get to the first question of the day. And the first question today comes to us from Patreon supporter. Well, thanks for being a Patreon supporter, Rosh. I know you don't want a Boba Fett movie, and neither do I. I would be up for a Boba Fett bounty hunter movie in the style of Magnificent Seven. That way, with Boba, they would be able to keep the mask on, and it wouldn't be an origin story. All right, well, thanks a lot for the question, Rosh. And again, thanks for being a Patreon supporter. I've actually said for a long time, I'm totally down for something along the lines of a Magnificent Seven in terms of a, bounty hunter movie. As a matter of fact, before we knew for sure what Rogue One was going to be about, there was rumors going around that it was going to be about a group of bounty hunters, that Rogue One was going to be about a group of bounty hunters. I remember talking about that topic and feeling rather excited about it. All because of exactly what it is you're saying. The notion of a Magnificent Seven kind of feeling, Western sort of feeling in the Star Wars galaxy. And I was extremely excited about that. And I loved Rogue One as it is. Like, I love Rogue One. But that would have been really cool too. As a fan, I'm totally up for a movie like that. Absolutely. Now, you're right. I don't want a Boba Fett movie. Of course, if they put it out, I'll go and watch it because it's Star Wars for sure. But I would rather them not make it. But part of the main reason that I don't want a Boba Fett movie is one of the things that makes Boba Fett so beloved, so great, is all the mystery surrounding him. He's hardly ever said anything. Aside from the prequels, we've never seen him take the mask off. I mean, he's a character shrouded in mystery and intrigue. Why do a movie about him that's going to just obliterate all of that? But, like you're suggesting, you do a Magnificent Seven kind of movies using bounty hunters. You could have Boba Fett in there, maybe not even make him the lead character per se, and you could still maintain that. That makes that possible. Would I rather have an all-original crew of bounty hunters maybe set in a different time? Maybe, sure. But if they did that and wanted to use Boba Fett, on that level, I'm totally cool with it. I think it could work just fine. So I love the idea. Let's see if they actually do that sometime. It'd be really interesting if they did. All right, let's move on now to the next question. And the next question today comes to us from Michael H. And Michael H. writes, if Solo and, more crucially, Alden Ehrenreich's portrayal of Han Solo are generally well received by critics and fans, do you believe the chances of Lucasfilm recasting Leia for Episode 9 increases? Seeing a new and hopefully awesome Han Solo, I believe fans would be more willing to accept a recast Leia. Thanks. All right, thanks a lot for the question, man. And I'm going to say no, and for a couple of reasons. One, I think J.J. Abrams, while the script is not done, I'm fairly certain that J.J. Abrams and Kathleen Kennedy and the folks and Pablo Hidalgo and the folks at Lucasfilm all know what the story of Episode 9 is going to be already. I think they know that. I'm not saying that there's a completed script. I don't think there is, but I think they already know what their story is. So I think that's already done. It'll certainly be done by the time that Solo, a Star Wars story, and I hate calling it that, it'll certainly be done by the time Solo hits theaters. By the time Solo hits theaters, that story is locked, and they're already well into the process of writing up the script. Of that, I feel pretty certain. But here's the other reason I would say no to that. Despite how desperately I want them to recast Leia. I really do. But here's the thing. The Han Solo thing is a completely different set of circumstances than the Leia thing. because it's not like they're recasting Han Solo to play Han Solo today. Like, Han Solo is still the same age that he is now, or he was when he died. You know, that Harrison Ford would still be the right age to play Han Solo. It's not like they're talking about replacing Harrison Ford. In Solo, they're going back in time, in essence, to doing the character in a way that they were required to use a different actor. If you're going to do a young Han Solo movie that takes place prior to the events of Star Wars: A New Hope, you need a different actor. That has to happen. The situation with Leia is a totally different circumstance. If they wanted to make a Princess Leia movie when she was 12, yes, the audience would be perfectly, okay, fine, you need to recast it. Yes, we expect a different actress. But recasting Leia now, considering the tragic circumstances of Carrie's passing, they're not the same set of circumstances. If they were, like, let's say the big controversy right now was not do they recast Leia for episode 9, but rather the controversy was, do they do a young Princess Leia, like an 11 or 12-year-old Princess Leia movie? If that was the case, then I would say yes. How Alden Ehrenreich is responded to as playing Han Solo in the Solo movie, that could have a direct effect on whether or not Lucasfilm will then feel comfortable going ahead and doing a young Princess Leia movie and recasting it with a young child actress, because those two are more similar circumstances. The circumstances that we have right now are completely different. So I'm still keeping my fingers crossed that they're going to recast Leia and tell that Leia story in episode 9 as they were always intending to do. However, I don't think the success or failure of Solo or Alden Ehrenreich playing the role is really going to have any impact on that because the circumstances are just too different. Good question, though. Totally good question. All right, let's move on now to the next topic. And the next topic is sent in to us from another one of my Patreon supporters, Kristen Popescu, who writes, looking again at the Falcon in the new trailer, I just seen something. The nose is totally different, longer. Do you think it could be a different ship? Han wins it at Sabacc, but Lando tricks him and gives him that other piece of junk he had lying around in a hangar somewhere. All right, thanks a lot for the question, man. And yes, the look of the Falcon in the Solo: A Star Wars Story trailers has thrown a lot of people for a loop because it looks significantly different. But remember, it's supposed to look significantly different. It's significantly older than when we come across it in A New Hope. On top of that, remember what Han says about the Falcon. She's had a lot of specification, like a lot of work done, a lot of specifications done to my own thing. Like, he's done a lot of work on the Falcon. That becomes clear in the original trilogy. Han's gone over it. So if you're going to make the Falcon in a Solo movie that happens earlier, you have to make it look different because it's already been established that Solo's done a lot of modifications on it. It's going to look different. Also, what you're proposing here is interesting, but I don't think would make sense with the way the universe is set up right now. For instance, in the original trilogy, Lando says, this ship is the fastest hunk of junk in the galaxy. Why would he trick Han out of taking one ship just to give him the fastest ship in the galaxy? Why would he do that? That makes no sense. Also, if you go into the original trilogy, the wording of the conversation makes it very clear. That's the ship. You know, they're talking on the landing platform in Cloud City, and he says, what did you do to my ship? Your ship. Hey, I won it. I won her. I didn't win this one. I won her fair and square. And Lando goes on, it's the fastest thing in the galaxy, and it is the fastest thing in the galaxy. It really doesn't make any sense to me that Lando would have given away the fastest ship in the galaxy just to keep a different ship. So that doesn't quite equate to me. Plus, much like the Obi-Wan Vader thing, you would have to twist and manipulate the clear meaning of the dialogue in the original trilogy to fit that new narrative. That maybe that's not the Falcon they're flying, and, you know, Han won the ship, but then Lando pulled a fast one on him and gave him a different ship. Like, that doesn't seem to make... That goes contrary to what was clearly established in the original trilogy. So it's a very interesting theory. I don't particularly subscribe to it because of all the reasons I just mentioned. But, I mean, who knows? We've seen stranger things happen. All right. We move on now to the final emailed in topic of the day before we go over to the live questions. This one might take us a little bit longer, though. This is the headline story of the show here. And I'm sure I'm going to get myself in trouble, but whatever. Okay. This one comes to us from Anthony R. And Anthony R. Now, granted, I had many emails from you guys regarding the dudes who from Game of Thrones who have been brought on. And I've had many emails about you guys talking about that news headline that I'm going to be talking about here. I just decided to pick Anthony's email to kind of encapsulate all of that into one. So I did read all of your emails. So here's what Anthony wrote. Hey, John, the whole controversy over the Game of Thrones guys doing Star Wars is ridiculous. I don't care that they're white. I'm black and Hispanic, and I could give two blanks. I care about a fleshed out story and well-developed characters and blah, blah, blah. Thank you so much, Anthony, for sending that in. And I talked a little bit on one of my shows earlier this week about this whole controversy, this really artificial controversy surrounding the hiring of the Game of Thrones guys to come in and do this new series of Star Wars films. Now, some people are mistakenly saying the Game of Thrones guys are directing new Star Wars. No. They're not directing. They're going to be producing and writing. So they're going to come up with the stuff and they'll hire other directors as they go. So they're not directing. And I remember being completely befuddled because you guys know me. I'm constantly arguing on my shows that Hollywood needs to expand and become more inclusive in what it does. I've been arguing that for years. You all know my position on this. However, I became a little befuddled about this whole thing that people were making a big issue out of the hiring of these two guys simply on the basis that they are white men. And that's concerning to me. And it's also counterproductive to everything we've been trying to accomplish with more inclusion, more representation coming in Hollywood. That is stuff we need. But simply attacking a hire strictly on the basis of the fact that they are white guys, to me, is counterproductive. Especially when you're talking about, okay, wait a minute. The world has basically been asking for a Game of Thrones style Star Wars experience. Okay, so what do? They go out and hire the creators and showrunners of the single most successful and pop culturally relevant television show of the past maybe 50 years. They get those guys, the most uniquely qualified guys on the planet, who are incredibly successful, have an incredibly hot name right now, and again, are the creators of and the showrunners of the single most pop culturally relevant and successful television show maybe in the last 50 years. And they go out and get those guys. That's a hire that makes sense. That's a hire that it's so perfect, it almost boggles the mind. It's a great hire. But there was a tax on it because they're white guys. And I don't believe that automatically, in striving for more representation in Hollywood, which we need, you've heard me argue till I was blue in the face about that. We need more representation in Hollywood, all that kind of stuff. That does not equate, I make the argument, that being a white guy becomes an automatic disqualifier. I don't think being a white guy should be an automatic disqualifier for you to get a job, especially when you are probably the most qualified person out there to do this thing. That is not furthering the cause of more representation in Hollywood. That is not furthering the cause of more inclusion in Hollywood. Creating automatic disqualifiers for somebody based on race or gender is not the answer. That's not the way we get to where we need to go. And we do need to go, but that's not the way to get there. Anyway, that's just all the context and the setup for this. What then became really concerning to me is that shortly after that piece of news got dropped, that these Game of Thrones guys got hired, I started seeing these headlines. That is simply the most misleading and deceptive headline I've seen in a while. So desperate for attention. But these are the headlines. It's basically been going this. In the wake of the Game of Thrones guys getting healed, these headlines I've seen pop up all over the place. Star Wars! 96% of the franchise directors and writers are white men. And it's not just them, man. I mean, it's like all over the place. That became a sexy headline. A sexy headline. Star Wars directors and writers are white male 96% of the time. I even read one website that I enjoy reading. I'm not going to name them. I'm not going to throw them under the bus. But I was reading this one website, And like their like subtitle on it is Lucasfilm, this is almost word for word, not interested in anybody other than white men for their thing. It's like, what? Now, John, you might say, but John, are you saying that 96% number is incorrect? I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that the 96% number is incorrect. But John, you're saying that that headline is misleading and deceptive. If it is correct, how is it misleading and deceptive? Because it's all about the narrative it's trying to paint and the context. All right? It's about narrative and context. Let's look at the narrative. I have no problem with like there being a fact and a figure. Facts and figures are simply facts and figures. That's it. But clearly, the intent of this headline, coming just 2 days after all this controversy about, oh, Star Wars hired white guys to do the new trilogy thing. Yeah, the guys who created and showrun Game of Thrones. The narrative that these headlines are trying to paint is that Star Wars, and Lucasfilm specifically, are unique in the sense that they are. Aren't you shocked that they are the worst offenders of lack of representation in Hollywood? I mean, never mind the fact that right now, Star Wars and Lucasfilm are under heavy attack from cousin humpers who say, you're all just a female agenda. You're anti-men agenda. Who ever heard of a black stormtrooper? And they're right now, Lucasfilm is under siege by all these cousin humpers, right? Completely under siege on that side. And now they're getting completely under siege from the other side saying you're not doing enough at the same time, which is rather ludicrous. But look, the narrative that these headlines are painting is that Lucasfilm is uniquely horrible in this. Lucasfilm is the worst offender at this. Running headlines specifically about Star Wars and Lucasfilm is creating this narrative that amongst all the problem in Hollywood, Lucasfilm is the prime example of everything that's wrong with Hollywood when it comes to representation and inclusion. Lucasfilm is the worst. Notice they didn't put producers. They only wanted to count directors and writers, because if you start including producers, the numbers don't create the narrative, the sexy narrative that they're creating. Okay, John, but if it's 96%, is that really all that misleading? Let's put it in context, okay, shall we? Let's put it in context. Context. Logical context. The great enemy of flashy, sexy headlines. Logical context. All right? Okay. You want to say that Star Wars only has hired 96% all white males. Okay. Let's be fair here. Let's put it in context. If you take away the prequels, and I think you have to take away the prequels. Why? Because the prequels were both directed and written by the property's creator. The guy who created the property decided to write and direct. He didn't hire anybody. He didn't hire white men. He didn't hire anybody. The creator of the property, George Lucas himself, he wrote and directed all the prequels himself. Okay? He just did that on his own. Because of that, I'm going to propose to you that we need to take it out of the equation. Because he didn't hire a director and he didn't hire a writer for those. He did it himself. All right? And he happens to be, yes, is he a white man? Yes, but he's also the creator of the franchise. He didn't hire a white director. He didn't hire a white writer. He didn't hire anybody. He did it himself. All right? So I believe it is perfectly logically sound to say, let's take the prequels out of it for a second. All right? Taking the prequels out. If you take the prequels out of the equation, they've only made 3 Star Wars movies in the last 35 fucking years. In the past 35 years, they've made 3 Star Wars movies. 3. That's it. 3 in the past 35 years. So you can throw around a number out of context and throw that number out there, but you're leaving out the fact that in the past 35 years, there's only been 3 movies they've made. When you're talking about, like, since they all rebooted the whole thing, you're talking about Episode 7, you're talking about Rogue One, you're talking about Episode 8. Now, we've got Solo coming, we got that. Yeah, those can be included later. Yes, it'll be fair to include those in this later. But as of right now, we've had 3 Star Wars films in the last 35 years. Now, if you want to go back to prior to that, get into the early 80s and the 70s, well, then it becomes about context again. How many big blockbuster franchises did studios give to women directors in the 70s? I'll let you in a little something here. I did a quick search for the most successful films in the 70s, or the best films in the 70s directed by female directors. And I got several top 5 lists. And here's the thing. Out of the top 5, I had only even heard of 3 of them. Not because women weren't good enough to direct great movies, but because that was just representative of the fact that women weren't given the opportunity by anybody at the time. You think it's bad now? Women weren't given the opportunity in the 70s. To suggest or try to make up some statistic and say it only applied to Lucasfilm is preposterous, misleading, and deceptive. Because that was the state of the industry at the time. It doesn't excuse anything at all. What I'm saying is that counters the narrative that these headlines try to create, that this is a uniquely Lucasfilm thing. Lucasfilm is the worst out of any of them. Look, 96% of them. Well, okay, yeah. If you take out the prequels, which nobody was hired to direct or write the prequels, then in the last 35 years, we've had 3 Star Wars films hit the theaters. 3. So let's deconstruct this narrative that they've been creating a little bit more. You know what else has had 3 films and just male directors and writers? How about the new Star Trek franchise? New Star Trek franchise has had 3 films. Guess what? All male directors, all male writers. Where are the headlines? Where are the headlines about Star Trek? 100% written and directed by white men. Where's that? Where's that headline? Where is it? I didn't see that. You know what else? Let's go to the first 3 films of the DCEU. All of the first 3 films, you talk about Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, and Suicide Squad, the first 3 films of the DCEU to hit theaters, guess what? Written, directed by dudes. All of them. Where were the headlines of DCEU 100% written and directed by dudes? Where's that headline? Okay, let's not just pick on the DCU. How about the MCU? They've had, like, before Black Panther, what they go, like 17 films with white dude directors? And I think one of the films might have had 1 female writer once out of 17 modern films. Where are the headlines? Where are the headlines about that? Marvel, 94% all directed by white. Where are those headlines? Now let's go to another franchise we all love, the Bourne franchise. I think that if you want to count the other ones, like the Matt Damon one, I think you got 5 Bourne films. Guess what? All written and directed by white dudes, all of them. Where are the headlines? Jason Bourne, 100% written and directed by, where's that one? And you know what else? How's this one? Try this one on for size. What about the Harry Potter franchise? How about Harry Potter? But John, J.K. Rowling is the creator of Harry Potter. She was not the director of any of them, and she was not the screenwriter of any of them. But John, she's the woman behind it. Well, if you want to use that logic, Kathleen Kennedy is the person behind and mainly responsible and in charge of the new Star Wars films. So if you're not going to count her, you don't get to count J.K. either. I mean, Warner Brothers put out this big press release, J.K. making her script writing debut with Fantastic Beasts. Okay, so she's got a story by credit on the Harry Potter films. Where's the headlines on those? My whole point here is this, is that these headlines create a false narrative, a misleading narrative, that somehow, some way, Lucasfilm is a uniquely egregious offender when it comes to lack of representation and inclusion in Hollywood. And that narrative that they're trying to paint by using these statistics is deceptive and misleading and completely lacking context. And that is counterproductive when you throw up stupid stupid arguments, it becomes counterproductive to what we really need, which is more inclusion and more representation in Hollywood. But throwing out bullshit arguments like this doesn't help the cause. It makes people, like, I am a known defender and proponent and advocate for more representation and more inclusion in Hollywood, but when you start getting people throwing up headlines like this, it makes me look stupid as somebody who tries to champion the cause. I try to, I'm sure I don't do a very good job, but as somebody who tries to become an advocate for the idea of more inclusion and more representation in Hollywood all the time till I'm blue in the face and having to constantly fight off the cousin humpers, when you run headlines like these, you actually damage my ability as an individual fan to make solid arguments about our need for inclusion and representation. And it is like stupid ass headlines like this and radically ignorant narratives that they try to paint like this just make the job all the more difficult, and they make it hard. And I was really happy to see a lot of the websites that I respect did not run with that headline, which is really good to see because, again, it completely lacked context. But again, you take out the prequels, which didn't hire any director or any writer because the creator did it. You got 3 movies in 35 years. And we're talking about a property that has done more than almost any other property in trying to further inclusion and representation on screen. Does some work need to be done moving forward? Yes. But you know what? 2 of the most powerful people at Lucasfilm when it comes to their stories is Kathleen Kennedy, obviously the president and the head of Lucasfilm, Pablo Hidalgo, the head of the story group, a Latino guy. And so I'm sure that's going to come. Does Lucasfilm also need to start working on that behind the camera? Yes, they do. Absolutely. But I just reject this bullshit narrative that they're trying to paint that somehow Lucasfilm is uniquely egregious in all this stuff when they, more than almost any other franchise, has been doing more to try to fix representation and inclusion on screen. Okay, maybe it's taking them a little bit more time to get it going behind the screen, but you've got the president of the company as a woman. I'm a big fan of too. Like, so it's headlines like that that drive me crazy. So I'm sorry. I know I've gone on about this extensively and at length, but oh my God, guys, this issue really drives me nuts. It really drives me nuts. When I started seeing those things, it's like, oh my God, there's like no context. This is ignorance in its purest form. So anyway, and what really, to quote Peter Griffin, what really cranks my gears is these cousin humpers who want to complain about, why is there a blackface in Star Wars? These guys, this just gives them ammunition. And that pisses me off. The fact that we're just handing over ammunition to the army of the ignorant really, really pisses me off. And anyway, so that's my on it. Clearly it bothers me a whole lot. So listen, guys, with that out of the way, I want to move on to the live questions and spend the whole rest of the show just taking your live comments and questions. Best way to do that, of course, is by utilizing the super chat. Also, if we run out of super chats and we still have time, I'll go and pick out a couple out of Twitter as well. But before we get to that, let me do my admittedly shameless plug for the thing that keeps the lights on around here, which is, of course, my Patreon page. Listen, guys, if you enjoy watching my videos at any time, whether you love smiling along with me or yelling at me on your computer screen, do me a favor, head on over to www.patreon.com/JohnCampea. When you're there, you'll get all the information about, number 1, what it means to be a Patreon supporter, number 2, how being a Patreon supporter actually keeps these shows on the air, and number 3, what benefits there are to being a Patreon supporter. Maybe after reading all that kind of stuff, you'll think, you know what? No, I'm still not going to be a Patreon supporter, which is totally fine. Or maybe you'll think, you know what? I want to become a Patreon supporter and be one of the people responsible for this show staying on the air. And if you do that, awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And a special thank you to all of you guys who are already Patreon supporters. I'm really lucky that you guys are on board with me. Thank you so much for your support. Okay, with that out of the way, let's head over to the first live question today. And the first live question today comes to us from Ben Rayner, who writes, can you explain dice in The Last Jedi? Are they of the original trilogy? Fair enough question, Ben, because not everybody remembers them. They're not really obvious in the original trilogy. But let me just grab a picture here to click, and bring it over here. Okay, so yeah, those dice are actually visible in the original trilogy. Here's just a quick picture online. You have Chewie getting in the cockpit of the Falcon, and obviously you see the dice. There are several pictures going around out there. So those dice were uniquely Han's. They belonged to him. They were visible in the original trilogy. Granted, they're never highlighted in the original trilogy. So you can totally be forgiven if you're watching The Last Jedi and you had no idea what those dice represented, because they were almost hidden like an Easter egg in many ways. So totally fair question, but that's where it comes from. Johan Aglin writes, should Star Wars try mixing genres more? Sort of like original trilogy was sci-fi western, or what Ant-Man / Spider-Man is today. Maybe even Rogue One counts as a war movie. Well, yeah, no. As I read the first part of the question, I was thinking, well, Rogue One is kind of a mixed genre movie in that it went into a war movie. And we were talking a little bit earlier about how I would love to see a Magnificent Seven styled, or even a Dirty Dozen styled bounty hunter movie in Star Wars as well. I agree, yes. We are now getting to the point that, much like the MCU did at some point, that Star Wars should start blending genres a little bit more. And I think as they expand beyond just the core saga stories of the Skywalkers, now they have the opportunity to do that. And I hope to see Solo as being the first film other than Rogue One to do that as well. So yes, I totally agree with you, Johan. Luis Francisco writes, The Last Jedi Blu-ray will have a couple of hours of extra stuff. An extended version of the movie would be great. Star Wars could do like Lord of the Rings. I mean, yes, they could, but more is not necessarily better. You know what I mean? Like, I thought the movie was long enough. I thought it did everything it could. Now, I am curious to see what other stuff they shot, but I'm more curious, just me personally. I know a lot of you will feel different, and that's totally cool. Just me personally, though, I'm more curious to see just the deleted scenes than I am seeing those deleted scenes edited into the movie. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not really interested in a 3-hour and 15-minute version of The Last Jedi. I just want to see The Last Jedi, and I'm totally curious to see the deleted scenes, but as a separate feature. But then there's a lot of people who just love seeing deleted scenes re-edited into the film, and that's cool too. That's just where I am as a fan. Cobra writes, would a Django movie be better than a Boba movie? I don't want anything that reminds me of the prequels, to be honest with you. I'm totally beyond that. So I will go, and this is just me, I think I would rather have a Boba Fett movie than a Django Fett movie, to be honest with you. I don't really want either, but if I had to take one, personally, I would go with Boba. A lot of people might go with Django. There you go. Luis writes again, hey, John, when do you think Disney will confirm what the new Star Wars movies are going to be about? So far, we just know Han, Solo, and Episode 9. Well, we're years away, right? It's because we're not getting another movie other than those two until 2020. And we're just at the beginning of 2018 right now. So there is certainly no rush to rush out there and say what the next one will be. I suspect, much like everybody else does, that the 2020 movie is going to be Obi-Wan. I have a strong suspect. I mean, I think most of us at this point believe that's what's going to happen. There have been a lot of unconfirmed reports as well around that. So I feel pretty safe in assuming that the 2020 film is going to be Obi-Wan. But then will we get 2 movies that year? With Rian Johnson doing a new trilogy, with the Game of Thrones guys coming on to do a new series of films. I mean, who knows? Maybe 2020 becomes that year that we get 2 Star Wars movies in the same year. We're going to have to wait and see for sure. But I don't see the need for Lucasfilm for at least a couple more months to tell us what's coming in 2020. Because there's really no point in letting us know at this point. So it's probably going to be a little while still. Now watch, they're going to announce it tomorrow. Anthony R. writes, John, thanks for taking my email question. Following up on that, I would love to see the Game of Thrones guys do a movie 100 years in the future with new Jedi, no Skywalkers, Solos, Poe, Finn, or Rey. Well, I don't know about in the future. I don't know that I'd be down for that. I am far more interested in the millennia we have in the past, when you can still get away from the Skywalkers, the Solos, the Poes, the Finns, the Reys, the BB-8s, the Snokes, whatever. I'm far more curious about the past, because here's the problem. If you go into the future 100 years, now you're creating a narrative problem. Because what if they want to do episode 10? Well, you already know what happens in 100 years, so there's going to be some light shed on who lives, who dies, how does the universe go, and I think that creates a narrative problem. You go 500 years in the past, you have no idea what's going to happen. Anything. So I'm half with you, Anthony. I want to see stories with no Skywalker, Solos, Poes, Finns, whatever, but I think I would rather see them go like 300-400 years in the past so they can still tell a totally free, hands untied story without causing the narrative problems I think doing a story like 100 years in the future would do for any further saga films that they may want to do. Interesting point, though. All right. Joshua Breen writes, "Hey, John, do you think looking back at the prequels received too much hate from fans?" No. I think they got what they deserved. And look, like everybody knows, I've talked about this 1,000 times. Like, I was so dying, and I was young, and I was so dying for these new Star Wars movies that when I saw it, I just convinced myself I liked it. Then I saw it again and realized it wasn't quite as good, but I still liked it. Then I saw it again. I saw it 17 times in theaters. By the time I got to time 6 or 7, I realized this movie isn't very good. But I kept going because I was working in visual effects at the time, and it was the most mind-blowing visual effects ever. But no, I certainly, like, I try to watch it now too. Like about once a year, once every 2 years, I still rewatch the prequels. See, do I change my mind yet? And they're Star Wars movies. No, they're dreadful. They're just dreadful. And look, if you're somebody who likes the prequels, I celebrate that. That's awesome. Good for you that you like them. Thumbs up. I'm not trying to change your mind at all. But for me, there's steaming piles of stank that I wish could be burned away from the halls of history. But they can't. They're there. So it is what it is. Nick's Music writes, thoughts about 20% drop in Star... Where do we go here? Oh, yeah. Thoughts about 20% drop in Star... SJW... Thoughts about 20% drop in Social Justice Warrior Star Wars toy sales. I got no thoughts except, I know people at Hasbro and say, look, everything goes in cycles. Things go up and down. Toy sales are strong. Toy sales are bad. They're strong again. They'll be bad again. I mean, there's really nothing much else to add. Besides that, I'm not really sure what it is you're asking in the first place. Let's see. D. Walthers writes, "Hey, John, did you hear about George Lucas being involved with the Obi-Wan movie that's being planned?" Okay, I heard a story that they're just looking, he's not involved. He's not making the movie. And by the way, this isn't a confirmed report by any stretch of the imagination. But even the story that's out there is not like he's coming up with the story and he's not involved. All right. Just be very, very clear on that. I know there was a story about it. If you want to look up the story, look up the story. But then other people started re-reporting it and a couple of headlines popped up. George Lucas involved in the Obi-Wan movie. It's like, no. If you read the original article, he's not involved per se. I think they're running, showing him some stuff and he's just giving a thumbs up to it, whatever, but he is not involved. He's not an employee of Lucasfilm, anything like that. So I think we need to reel that in just a little bit. Anthony R. writes, "Old Republic would be cool as hell, but at the same time, I want to move forward. A new Jedi Order built from Rey's legacy, if it happens in 9, is better to me. No more Empire, First Order, etc. either." Again, though, my problem is you create narrative problems and you start tying the hands. If you do a story 75 years, 100 years in the future, right? Well, now you are tying the hands of the filmmakers making episodes 10, 11, and 12 because now they can't do anything that contradicts that movie that takes 100 years, that happens 100 years in the future. You are essentially tying their hands now, and you're creating a narrative continuity canon problem. Whereas if you go 500 years in the past, you're so far in the past at that point, you can do anything, and it doesn't matter because everything fixes itself in 500 years. Like you could say that Coruscant has a brutal civil war on the planet and decimated the planet. That's fine because you can say it got rebuilt within 500 years. You can do anything you want totally creatively 500 years in the past, or even 100 years in the past, really, in many ways. But again, I think you're creating narrative problems by trying to jump forward 100 years. Anyway, that's just my thought on that. All right, next one comes to us from Ben, and Ben writes, "What do you think is better? Which do you/did you enjoy more, the Lord of the Rings trilogy or the first 2 movies of the current Star Wars trilogy?" I enjoyed the Lord of the Rings trilogy more than the first 2. I like the first 2 movies of this of this new trilogy very much. You all know this. I like it very much. However, to me, and this is just to me, they don't compare to the original trilogy. The original trilogy to me is still far and away the best Star Wars films ever made. I thought these films were very good. I was happy with them as a Star Wars fan. I eat them up. I enjoy them very much. But are they in my like top 20 best films of all time list? No. The episode 7 and episode 8 wouldn't be that high on my list. The Lord of the Rings is. So while the Lord of the Rings doesn't compare to Star Wars, the original trilogy, I would still take Lord of the Rings over the first 2 new installments of the Star Wars franchise, which is fine. I mean, I would take the Lord of the Rings trilogy over 99.9% of all movies out there. Doesn't mean there aren't great movies that I thoroughly enjoy. I really enjoy the new Star Wars films, but yeah, if you're going to say compared to some of the most celebrated films of all time, I'll take the most celebrated films, the films amongst the most celebrated of all time in the Lord of the Rings films. Let's see. Sorry, guys, the cough is still here. Where do we go? I did Ben. Okay, Gareth Tucson writes, fight to the death, 100 porgs or 10 fish nun caretakers. R-rated movie, what do you think? Dark moments happen in Star Wars. Remember, Revenge of the Sith. I'm on the fence. I'll take the nuns. They look pretty, they'd be pretty nasty with those brooms. They reminded me of my Italian grandmother. Actually, that's one of the reasons why I laugh so hard at those nuns on the island, is they reminded me a lot of my Italian grandmother. And my Italian grandmother, when she would get angry, she would go for the matamosca. It was the fly swatter. She would go for the matamosca. And my Italian grandmother, she could wield that thing like a samurai sword, man. And like fear would keep the local systems in line. Fear of the matamosca. I mean, that would like terrify people when she would go for that. So since those things remind me of my Italian grandmother with a broom, I'll take them over the porgs. Let's see. Timothy West writes, it seems like no matter what they do, they can't win. Well, yeah, it does kind of seem like that, doesn't it? They get attacked on one side, and then they get attacked for totally the opposite thing on the other side. It reminds me a lot, or at least a little bit, like when I'm talking comic book movies, I've got these brain dead DC fanboys who just are like, I'm on Marvel's payroll and blah, 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 blah. And then I got the brain dead Marvel fanboys who like, why are you sucking DC's penis so hard? Why are you on DC's payroll? It's like, I wish you guys would get together and make up your minds. Like, whose payroll am I on? Because I need to know who to send my bill to, because nobody's sending me anything right now. And if I'm supposed to be getting checks, I want to get some checks. But that's what kind of reminds me of Star Wars situation right now. They seem to be getting it on both ends, harshly and without lube. Let's see. Abram Treadwell writes, I lean right, and I think you're spot on regarding the director representation. Thanks for being a reasonable human being. We need more people like you. And you know what? I honestly think that if more people, both on the left and the right of any issue, or on the Marvel and the DC, or on the Star Wars and Star Trek, whatever, I think if you get more people who take a side, which is fine to take a side, refuse to be slavish servants of their dogma, and rather just say, hey, yeah, I'm on this side, but I also want to think rationally and critically. And I think if you had people on both sides of whatever issue just make a commitment to saying, hey, we believe in our side, but we're not just going to be slave servants to our dogma. We're still going to think rationally and critically. I think you'd see a lot more common ground on things. And just being a blind slave to your dogma is never, or at least very, very rarely productive. Very rarely productive. Let's see. Johan writes, if they move to 2 movies a year, can they go back? Oh, like back to 1 movie of the year? Oh yeah, I don't see any reason why they couldn't. For sure they could. If they started doing 2 movies a year, there's no rule, there's nothing that says you have to continue putting out 2 films a year. I mean, like if they, pardon me, if they start doing like running 2 trilogies at the same time, let's say for argument's sake, they start an Old Republic trilogy and they start doing episodes 10, 11, and 12. And they're doing it at the same time where, you know, episode 10 and the part 1 of the Old Republic trilogy come out in the same year. You probably want to finish out those trilogies, but after that's done, then you can go back to 1 film a year if you want, or you can go up to 3 films a year if you want. I mean, there used to be a time when we get like 2 or 3 comic book movies a year. Now we're getting like 8, 9, or 10 a year. So it can happen and it can go up and go down. And I really don't think it would be that big of an issue for them to go back down if they did increase the number they were doing now. Let's see. James writes, how would you improve the prequels? Come on, James. that's like a 5-hour essay. That's not something I can just answer in 20 seconds here. It would certainly start with getting different directors. Let George Lucas oversee the story, which is what he's best at. He should have got different directors. He should have got people who could say no to him. And there's about 1,000 different story points, but I don't have time that I can go into all of those. So it's like a blanket statement. It's like asking, how do you bring peace to the Middle East? Oh yeah, I'm going to answer that in 20 seconds. I mean, that's a big, big question, man. It's not really one I can address that quickly. Anthony R. writes, 500 years in the past would be cool with 400-year-old Yoda. Of course, we don't want it focused on him. I still like Yoda to be a mystery, but seeing his old Jedi comrades would be cool. Like, yeah, and look, while I don't want every movie we have to be based on already existing characters, like the Magnificent Seven idea for a bounty hunter movie, I'm cool if Boba Fett is there. Like, if you just want to have Boba Fett there in the movie, I'm totally cool with that. Just don't make Boba Fett the lead character. Don't make the movie about Boba Fett. I'm fine with what you're suggesting too, Anthony, with going back. Because with that age, Yoda could still be around. Obviously, he would still be around, right? So if Yoda made an appearance in a movie like that, I'm fine with that. As long as it's not a young Yoda movie. As long as he's not the primary character. As long as he's not one of the 3 primary characters. If he's, an adjunct character there, if he's a supplementary character, I'm totally good with that. I really am. That's fine for me. As long as you're just not going back and doing all that stuff. Let's see. Reeled it in. P.S. I sent you more fan art. Well, I love getting fan art. And it is kind of amazing, some of the fan art that you guys have sent into me, because I just eat it up. Some of the fan art that you guys send into me has just been absolutely spectacular, and I totally love it. All right, next up, Daniel Castro writes, I would like to see an origin story. Oh, where did it go? Oh, there it is. I would like to see an origin story about the Jedi and the Sith. Thoughts? Oh yeah, that would be great. I would love to see an origin story about the Jedi and the Sith. As long as Yoda wasn't there, and as long as Obi-Wan wasn't there, and you really went to the roots in the galaxy about the Sith and the Jedi getting their start, I'd totally be down for that. That could be a total Hatfields and McCoys kind of story. I mean, that could be really good. Or Romeo and Juliet. What are the Montagues and what's the name of the families in Romeo and Juliet? I think the Montagues is one of them. Anyway, I can't remember. Anyway, I'm failing my Shakespearean friends out there right now by forgetting the names. But that could totally be a great story. That could totally work. Sarah O.D. writes, what's your favorite film from the Oscars for Best Picture? I loved Call Me By Your Name. I liked Call Me By Your Name. I don't love it as much as a lot of people do, but it's a very, very good film. Man, Shape of Water is so damn good. Dunkirk is so damn good. Man, there's a number of them that are really great. I have yet to really be able to nail down what my pick would be to win Best Picture. I've yet to nail that down, and I've got to hurry. I've only got a couple more weeks to do it. But there are certainly a number of the films that are absolutely outstanding. Call Me By Your Name is an outstanding film. But yeah, it's hard. There's so many of them. So I'd have to think about that just a little bit more. All right, guys, listen, still got 10 minutes left. So if you want to send in a super chat, you can. But what I'm going to do right now while we're waiting on that is I'm going to open up some Twitter questions. If you guys want to fire off a Twitter question right now, maybe you'll see it pop up. You can tweet to me simply at John Campea. That's once again, fire me off a tweet on Twitter, just at John Campea. Send that in there, and maybe I will pick your tweet out so you can send that in right now. And I'm still just kind of stumped a little bit on this whole question about my favorite picture that is nominated for Best Picture right now. But anyway, so there's that. All right. I'm just waiting to see if any of you guys start firing in tweets at the moment. And if I don't get another tweet in another 30 seconds, I'll probably just call it a day and we'll end it a little bit short. But Say also sends in a super chat saying, as long as there are lightsabers in Star Wars, I'm happy. Well, I don't know, man. There were lightsabers in the prequels, and they didn't make me all that happy. Also, I suspect we're not going to see any lightsabers in the Solo movie. It wouldn't seem to make much sense to me that we'd see any lightsabers in the Solo movie. So be prepared to be disappointed for that. Just prepare yourself now. Really kind of doubt that we're going to get any lightsabers in the Solo story right there. All right, guys. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up here. We got a few minutes to spare. One last one from James Gold. Okay, this will be the last question I take from James Gold, who writes in, I think the Tesla Roadster looking so awkward flying through space vindicates Mary Poppins' Leia. Your thoughts? I don't know, man. I don't know. I thought it was kind of cool. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. But I take exception to that Mary Poppins flying through space. Remember, this was not unprecedented, what we see Leia do in space. And remember, she wasn't flying. You float in space. All it would have taken for Leia to sail from point A to point B in space is the slightest nudge. The slightest force nudge would be enough to send her sailing down into the ship. And so I always still go a little bit crazy when I hear people bring up the Mary Poppins, Princess Leia flying through space thing. That just never made sense to me because, like, it actually does make sense and it works in the movie when you understand the principles behind it. But anyway, that's just my thought. That's just me. Anyway, that will do it for me, guys, for this week's installment of Star Wars Talk Tuesdays, my favorite day of the week. Thank you so much for being here and participating in the show with me. Once again, guys, don't forget, if you want to send in a topic for next week's show, just email me anytime at john@thejohncampeashow.com. Put SWTT in the subject line and keep your emails to as short as possible. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. A lot of you guys aren't subscribed yet. Click the subscribe button, be here. Also, click the thumbs up button. That helps the videos quite a bit. Leave a thought or a comment below. But remember, guys, we're all on the same team here together. We're all Star Wars fans. Whether we love the prequels, hate the prequels, love The Last Jedi, hate The Last Jedi, whatever, we're on the same side. So as we discuss and debate, make sure we treat each other as fellow Star Wars fans. So that will do it for me, guys. Thanks so much for joining me. My name's John Campea, and until my next video, bye-bye.